Okay, so if you're here, you've heard the trailer, you've got the basic gist of what the podcast is going to be. If not, well, you're in luck because this is going to be a full introduction to the podcast, what the goals are, who I am, why I'm doing this, etc., etc. Okay, so a little background on who I am. If you were to look me up on social media or ask my friends and family, you'd probably see a pretty straightforward success story. On LinkedIn, you'd see that I have a master's degree in business creation where I graduated at the top of my class. On Instagram, you may have to go digging a ways, but you'd see a world traveler. If you talk to my friends in high school, you might hear about a guy who decided to pick up a lacrosse stick for the first time as a sophomore, pretty late in life, but I worked hard enough to be a varsity starter by my junior year. On paper, those stories make sense. They're stories about a guy who sets a goal, works hard, and wins. Those are the kind of stories we like, clean and tidy with a happy ending. Typical social media, grass is always greener. But if you look closer, the story gets messy. That same guy who graduated at the top of his Master's of Business Creation class, he ironically spent 5 years unable to create a business that worked. Only recently has rubber hit the road, and that's coming on the back end of months of rebuilding and pivoting and retooling. And those world jet-setting adventures came on the heels of one of the toughest years of my life professionally, personally, and in my marriage. And that kid who grinded his way to the top, grinded his way to a varsity starting spot, well, guess what? I also got accepted into medical school, the ultimate trophy for a grinder, and then realized I was climbing the wrong mountain only to work my way back down and then start from the beginning. And I'm telling you this because we live in a world that judges us by our highlights. But I've learned that our real identity isn't found in the highs. It's found all along the path through the highs and the lows. So who am I? Well, my most proud titles are husband and father. I have an amazing wife who supports me through all the crazy twists and turns that are part of life, both the ones that come by chance and the ones that are self-inflicted. Making it through 2 years of infertility has been the hardest thing I've ever been through emotionally, and my heart aches for anyone who's gone through that or is currently going through that or knows anyone who's going through that, especially if they had a longer journey than us, which is probably most. It's not fun at all, but certainly it presented a great opportunity for deepening our marriage, and we're ultimately thrilled with the outcome. It's not fun at all, but ultimately it presented a great opportunity for my wife and I to deepen our marriage and our relationship, and we are absolutely obsessed with the outcome. So grateful for our 3-month-old daughter. I'm also a die-hard Cleveland Browns fan, which, if you know anything about the NFL, means I have basically a PhD in resilience and irrational hope. Same thing has also been true of my fandom of the Utah Jazz and the University of Utah. And while I love sports, I'm also a total closet nerd. I love Pokemon and Zelda and collecting retro Nintendo game systems and games. I love reading lit RPG books, fantasy novels about characters leveling up, because deep down, I'm obsessed with the idea of progression, even when I feel stuck in real life. I also like sci-fi and any good old-fashioned fiction book. And when I'm not reading fiction to escape the stuckness of life, I also read a lot of self-help books. And that's certainly part of starting this podcast. Lately, I think they tend to be a little too drawn out a lot of times. And mostly, I just want the nuggets of gold hidden every 20 pages or so. Victim of the instant gratificationism that is a borderline epidemic crisis these days, I suppose. Finally, I'm a bit of a know-it-all. One of those traits... Finally, I am a bit of a know-it-all. One of the traits I admired most about my dad growing up was his ability to seemingly know something about everything. As I've tried to emulate that trait, however, I've definitely found myself becoming more of a rambler, constantly trying to demonstrate that I have insights to add and that I know something about everything. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So now you know a little bit about me. What about the podcast? Really, it boils down to two goals, both of which are entirely selfish. So, firstly, this podcast is for my daughter as well as any other kids I may have. I'm opening the doors to you because I want feedback and I want different perspectives. I want to become a better dad, and I think doing this in public just helps me progress towards that. That's why I'm letting you in. And honestly, I hope you find a lot of value as this thing grows and develops, and I hope I get the same thing out of it. Secondly, on that note, I want to do this for personal development. I want to get better at this. I want to become a better communicator. I want to learn how to ask a question that unlocks a real answer rather than just thinking about what I have to say next. I want to learn how to tell a story that actually lands and is succinct and not rambly, hence what I said earlier. In this way, the podcast is kind of a training ground for me. I'm working out my ability to listen and articulate and connect. And I figure the best way to learn is to sit down with people who have lived through the things I haven't and simply ask them, what did you learn? I develop I also hope I develop personally enough to not need to be the smartest or the loudest person in the room. Because although I probably usually can be the loudest if I want, I'm certainly not the smartest, and that's a great thing about life. We can all learn something from one another. So if you're listening to this, you're not just getting the notes, you're watching me learn how to take them in real time. All right, that's probably enough of an intro as to what the podcast is about. That's who I am. That's where we're going with the podcast. The goal is 2 episodes per week, and that brings us to the end of our first episode. Every week, I'm going to end the show by distilling part of what we talked about into one specific note for later, hence the title of the podcast. This is a 2-minute or less takeaway you can put in your pocket. These will also be put out on short form in YouTube and maybe TikTok or Instagram, depending on how things go. So for today, the note is about timing. It's easy to believe that we can't share our voice until we have the after photo. Society and social media make us think we need the successful business, the medical degree, or the perfect family vacation before we have anything valuable to say. We treat the struggle kind of like a waiting room, somewhere where we just have to sit quietly until our real life begins. But looking back at my last 5 years, I realized that the waiting room was really the classroom, and that the most successful people treat it that way. If you're in the messy middle right now, don't just try to survive it. Document it. Pay attention to it. Because the wisdom and insight aren't the medal that you get at the finish line. It's what you get every step along the way. The more intentional you are, the more you get. Here's the thing. My daughter won't care that I didn't go to medical school or about any one of my failed business ventures. She will care about who I became because of those things. Okay, that one was maybe a little more soapboxy than I'd like to be, at least in the ones I'm recording solo. But thanks for joining me on the start of this new track. Hopefully they get better in the future. This one, obviously, a little rough, just because it's the first time. But as I grow and develop, I hope you'll grow and develop along with me, and we'll have the opportunity to hear from some amazing people and get their amazing stories, in addition to supplementing them with any of the insights I've had that are in addition to supplementing them with any of the insights I've had that will probably be less interesting episodes, but definitely is part of the reason I want to do this. So subscribe so you get the next episode, and I look forward to seeing you there.